Most often alone, but sometimes in pairs, he sent them to meditate in the dark chambers. Taking only water, no food, the monk would enter the cave, walk through the long tunnel, dodging the massive wooden supports that prevented cave-ins, until there was no light, then walk some more. Once inside the blackness of this space, he would settle down to stay for a day, for 2 days, as instructed, rarely more. He was to chant and meditate, nothing else, except, and this was the sadhana, to seek the light within, the clear white light of the mind. Sometimes, when meditating, one does not know if he is seeing the inner light, or perhaps seeing the luminous space of the room beyond his closed eyes. But in a cave, deep in the earth, there is no peripheral light. There is blackness, there is silence, there is nothing else. Monks would dive into themselves in that cave, distracted at first with the random intrusions of recent experience, of their projects back at the monastery, the paucity of food, whatever. But as the hours flowed by, the silence grew, and that silence worked well to bring them into the light of the mind. And where you see the light in a darkened cave, you know it's not coming from anywhere else, it's coming from you. A few monks returned to speak of extraordinary moments when the light coming from within also illumined the floor and walls of the cave, brightly enough for them to discern details of the tunnel, bright enough for them to walk out without turning on their flashlight. Such was the way of the guru in those days. Master wrote about the inner light shortly after these cave experiences. Remember, when the seal is broken and clear white light has flooded the mind, there is no more a gap between the inner and the outer. Even uncomplementary states of consciousness can be dissolved through meditation and seeking again the light. The aspirant can be aware that in having a newfound freedom internally and externally, there will be a strong tendency for the mind to reconstruct for itself a new congested subconscious by reacting strongly to happenings during daily experiences. Even though one plays the game, having once seen it as a game, there is a tendency of the instinctive phases of nature to fall prey to the accumulative reactions caused by entering into the game. Therefore, an experience of inner light is not a solution. One or two bursts of clear white light are only a door opener to transcendental possibilities. The young aspirant must become the experiencer, not the one who is experienced and basks in the memory patterns it caused. This is where the not too sought-after word discipline enters into the life and vocabulary of this blooming flower, accounting for the reason why ashrams house students apart for a time. Under discipline, they become experiencers, fragmenting their entanglements before their vision daily while doing some mundane chore and mastering each test and task their guru sets before them. The chela is taught to dissolve his reactionary habit patterns in the clear white light each evening in contemplative states. Chapter 23, Off to Europe. In the spring of 1967, Master Subramunia embarked on a 14-week journey to Europe, which he called the Actinics World Tour. With 3 monks and 5 family members, he flew to Paris, bought a used Volkswagen van, and set out to visit 14 countries. In each nation, they visited spiritual leaders. They met with monks in Swiss monasteries and priests in Roman theological seminaries. The budget for the tour was small, a mere $2 a day per person for room and board. So the group camped out, throwing their sleeping bags down in French wheat fields and bathing in streams in Germany's Black Forest. Twice the group checked into a rural inn and indulged in a hot shower. It was a wild and wonderful adventure. They bargained for Persian carpets in the Kasbah in Tunis, and due to a breakdown in American-Algerian relationships, were taken off a plane and held hostage at gunpoint in an Algerian airport for 36 hours. In Venice, Master spent 3 days exploring a previous life experience. With 2 monks, he walked around the entire city, occasionally hiring a gondola. He was consciously looking for a certain place, outside a theater, he said. He looked and looked for hours. On the 3rd day he suddenly exclaimed, "Here it is. This is the place where I was killed in a previous life." I was just leaving the small stage door over there after an opera performance when someone came up behind me, hit me in the head, and threw me into the canal to drown. Master mentioned later that night that he was always reluctant to sing in this life, and he attributed it to that horrible death long ago. He confided that it was hard to leave the body of that opera singer, because it was turning out to be such a nice life. In Ascona, Switzerland, he spent 2 weeks at Casa Iranos, Carl Jung's charming summer chalet on the shore of Lago Maggiore, a massive mountain lake shared by Italy and Switzerland. Meditating, giving upadeshas, and browsing through Jung's personal library, Master discovered the famed psychologist's penchant for Indian philosophy and his deep engagement with Kundalini. One morning a young monk asked the guru to describe the inner light. A few words of response came, but suddenly Master grew pensive, excused himself, and retired to his room. After some hours, the monks knocked tentatively on the locked door to invite him to lunch, but he told them he was busy. Hours passed, and again they knocked, with no response. Though they were loath to disturb him, this was so unusual, the group began to worry aloud whether they should intervene. While those deliberations were under way, Master unlocked and opened his door, calling them all to join him on the open stone patio that overlooks the lake. It was late afternoon. With them seated around, he brought out a yellow pad of paper, the kind lawyers write on. Beaming and clearly happy about something, he repeated the morning's question about the light, then revealed that he had brought through a small book during those solitary hours. He announced the title, The Clear White Light, then proceeded to read the manuscript, a profound explication of the mystical experience. Aside from cognizant ability, it was to be the only major work he ever wrote in his own hand, all others having his inspired talks and dictations as their source. Here is an excerpt. It is a great new world of the mind that is entered into when first the clear white light dawns, birthing a new actinic race, immediately causing him to become the parent to his parents and forefathers. When living in an expanded inner state of mind, he must not expect those living in materialistic consciousness to understand him. On this new path of the lonely one, wisdom must be invoked to cause him to be able to look through the eyes of those who believe the world is real, and see and relate to that limited world in playing the game as if it were real, thus maintaining the harmony so necessary for future unfoldments. To try to convince those embedded in materialism of the inner realities only causes a breach in relationship, as it represents a positive threat to the security they have worked so hard to attain. First we had the instinctive age of valuing physical strength and manly prowess, followed by the intellectual age, facts for the sake of facts, resulting in the progress of science. Now we are in an age of new values, new governing laws, an actinic age, with new understanding of the world, the mind, but most of all, the self. Understanding is preparation for travel, for it is an age of the mind, and in the mind, much more intense than the speed of light, exist spheres which seers are only willing to speak of to those who have the inner ear with which to listen. The mind of man tends either toward light or toward darkness, expanded awareness or materialistic values. Depending upon the self-created condition of the mind, man lives either within the clear white light of the higher consciousness or in the external mind structure which reflects darkness to his inner vision. Leaving Switzerland, the 9 actinics drove forth through Austria, Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Denmark. Master's purpose was to spread his Advaita Yoga teachings throughout Europe, and toward the end he lectured at Sorbonne University in Paris and sponsored the first ever yoga conference in Amsterdam, bringing 100 yogis and yoga teachers together from throughout Europe. As they drove week after week through Europe, Master sat in the front seat of the Volkswagen, dictating the yoga letters to a monk sitting in the back with a portable typewriter. The van became a mobile writer's studio, and all enjoyed listening as the teaching of the day flowed forth in his rich voice. When one was finished, they would stop at a local post office and mail the typed papers back to the monks in Virginia City to be dutifully published, so all at home could follow Master's journey. Here is an excerpt. There is another great exerciser of the inner nerve currents, and that is using our willpower. This is where the term inner strength comes from. It is through practices such as finishing a job once started, doing each job perfectly, keeping promises, and just living a life in accordance with one's highest ideals that these inner currents are strengthened. When a person has been using his inner willpower to accomplish his goals, you can feel his inner strength emanating from within him. When that person sits down to meditate, he will undoubtedly attack his meditation in the same manner, strengthening even further these inner currents. The desire to meditate comes from positive accomplishments, which have been gained through the practice of meditation itself. After a certain number of successful meditations, the subconscious begins to anticipate the next meditation until the mind is so conditioned that it constantly holds a meditative vibration. At this point, the desire for meditation is automatic, and meditation becomes a way of life. Then the energies and understanding of the fourth dimension are always available and are an ever-present part of a person's life. Shouted from the rooftops. Returning to America, Master dove into the spiritual regimens he loved so. Sunday sermons, monks training, radio interviews, the long desert drives to his Nevada monastery. He had gained some fame as a yoga teacher, and to his surprise was invited to be a guest professor at UCLA for a week, lecturing from the master course. He held a similar series at the International House in Berkeley for UC students, lectured at Stanford, and traveled on an extensive speaking tour through Southern California, Colorado, the East Coast, British Columbia, and Washington. In Seattle, he gave talks on Hindu mysticism and esoterics at the Aquarian Foundation, a spiritualist occult church established in 1955 by Reverend Keith Reinhardt, whom Master knew well. It was a time of reaching out, taking the deepest teachings into the colleges and communities around America. It was not a time to remain silent about the self, he would say, but to shout it from the rooftops. American youth were remarkably open to this mystical message during those few years, as never before or since. During 1968, Master Subramania lectured extensively in the Midwest for the first time and participated in a television series at San Francisco State College that featured dialogue with Zen Master Roshi Suzuki. Weekends were passed in San Francisco, but most of the week found him at the Nevada Monastery, which became his primary home and new headquarters. His time was spent more and more with the monastics and with his published works. Yoga and meditation were a vital part of personal, individual sadhana for all of Master's followers. Each was instructed to hold a 15 or 20-minute meditation without fail after waking in the morning and before sleep. These inner explorations would become the anchor of their lives, giving them a security and insight that made each day joyous and each experience welcomed. Whenever their karmas became too intense and they came to him for relief, he would ask first if they were meditating regularly. Usually, for those whose balance had been lost, the answer was no. The emphasis of Master's talks in the early 60s was on the awakening of the superconscious and the possibility of realizing the self by clearing the subconscious. Encounter groups had gained popularity, therapy sessions where people shared things that were otherwise taboo and unspoken. Using the term enter in, Master implemented for his monks only group sharing. To facilitate subconscious cleansing for his family members, he instituted the practice of confession, called Agni Yoga, personal sharing with the guru of one's past, of those hidden repressions that hold us back on the path. Students with deep-seated repressions, painful memories, and bottled-up character tendencies that they had never been able to confront or talk about would often come into their first inner light experience after going through a soul-searching series of confessions. This was a major area of training for the early monks, as they listened under Master's guidance to hundreds and even thousands of confessions. He taught them how to take the energies of those personal revelations and draw them into the light where they would be resolved, not by analysis, not by any rational insight, but simply by being in the presence of the clear white light. Birth of a mystical language. In July of 1968, Master led 32 students on a travel study program called Inner Search Switzerland. He had long been dissatisfied with presenting the philosophy and concepts of Hinduism and yoga in English. The subtle states of meditation and intricate inner disciplines cannot be easily conveyed through the medium of an externally oriented language like English, he found. At Casa Iranos, Master went deep within, seeking a solution that would allow humanity better access to and understanding of the interior states of consciousness spoken of in Hindu sacred texts. After a series of meditations, on the morning of July 28th, the alphabet of the Shum language came forth from the inner mind, first one character, then another, as he sat in deep meditation, clairvoyantly seeing and clairaudiently hearing the characters form and word. When he had written them all down, he ran outside excitedly, waving the paper in his hand. "I've got it, I've got it," he said to one of the monastics passing by. He showed what he had done and dedicated much of the remainder of the retreat to bringing out more. An entirely new language of meditation, its basic alphabet, script, syntax, and first vocabulary words, called pictures and portraits, was developed during the retreat. In the summer of 1968, Himalayan Academy conducted an inner search travel study program to Ascona, Switzerland. I was working on a little book called The Advaitin. The book was about the refined states of experience deep within the inner realms of pure consciousness, just before one merges into the self and after one comes out of that state. The little book was unfolding beautifully, but upon rereading what had been written, I thought, this is very understandable to me, but would it be so to someone just beginning on the path? It's going to be so complicated, so difficult to understand. For what I wish to portray in words, there are no words in the English language. I then began to feel that what should be done was to begin using Sanskrit to provide the necessary, adequate words so that the inner and refined areas of the mind would have their own name, in the same way emotions, physical things, and so forth are named in English. At our Ascona summer retreat, this theory that unfolded from within was going round and round in my mind, and I began looking through several Sanskrit dictionaries to locate certain words that could be used in the Advaitin. But in 3 Sanskrit-English dictionaries, each translator had translated each of the words in a different way. I threw up my hands at this and said, this is going to make it more confusing for my beginning students than if we didn't use Sanskrit, simply because of the differing translations. The feeling began to come that what was really needed was another language, a new, fresh language, one giving me a vocabulary that we could use to accurately describe inner states of consciousness. 2 or 3 days later, we traveled to Venice for a few days' excursion. This idea of a new language was still strong in my mind. It was in Venice that I decided to go deeply within and bring out a new esoteric language. So I went deep within myself and wrote down a message of instructions dictated by one of the Mahadevas to my outer self. The Mahadeva explained how and where to go within to be able to unfold another language. My instructions were, you go within the Uda current, which is found within the Shushumna. That is the current of mind flow where language exists. In following the instructions, my spine lit up in a beautiful pale yellow and lavender light. The yellow and the lavender intermingled, one color coming in and out of the other. It was just beautiful, but I only found one end of the Uda current and did not have any results in Venice. 3 days later, after returning to Ascona, Switzerland, while working within myself, I found both ends of the Uda current. Then, in meditation, after coming out of the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I heard the tones of the Svadhisthana, the Anahata, and the Ajna chakras. Within 2 hours, out of my inner mind came the script, the basic alphabet of 18 sounds, the syntax as well as some of the basic vocabulary. Like Shimshumbishi, Vumtyeudi, Karahana, the first word to be uttered as Shum. Shum now names the mystical language of meditation. As fast as I could, I wrote it all down and ran downstairs to one of the monks shouting, I have it, here is our language. Because of the immediate need for a vocabulary of 50 or 100 words for me to work with during the Inner Search Travel Study Program, I was eager to proceed in bringing through the new language. Shum started out in a very simple way. I thought, fine, now we will have 10 or 15 or 20 or maybe 100 more words eventually to work with, and they will be marvelous inner teaching tools. However, in the days to follow, this Uda current became stronger and brighter and brighter. I didn't tell anyone about it at the time, except 2 or 3 of the Shiavite monastics who were with me in Switzerland. I began working day and night, and the structure and script for the language began to refine itself, and vocabulary started coming through, right from the inner light. I would see light within my head and see little images or letters in the Shum script drop down one after another and line up. Then I would read the word like Shum Shim Ishi and know what it meant, and then write the Shum word with the meaning in English. Vocabulary flowed out like this for 2 or 3 weeks. In Nike, in southern France, the whole concept of Leonasi, the psychic nerve system, and Alekaishum, the warmth and psychic heat of the body, came through. Then, later in our inner search in Paris, more of Shum came through. Upon returning to the United States, I had a vocabulary of about 300 words, and every day more were coming to earth. Finally, the images stopped dropping out of the inner light, and I would hear the meaning of the word clairaudiently, almost as if someone were speaking. Sometimes they would come in reverse. English first, Shum second. The vocabulary and the structure of the language developed quickly, but what is more important, the perspective of the Shum language was available. In the Shum language, the perspective is deep within the mind. It is called Shumif. From this perspective, we have the consciousness that we are the center of the universe. We see light within the spine as the central pole, and then open our eyes and look out into the world. The following year, 1969, we returned to Switzerland and experienced the tremendous breakthrough of Mamba Shum. These are Shum maps of areas of meditation that enable a devotee not only to map out his meditation before he begins it, but to make memos of the meditation as it progresses. Now devotees are able to go back to the same area of the inner mind, time and time again. By following the same Mambashum, more than one person can go into the same area of the mind, time and time again. Mystical experiences began to develop between myself and the devotees, as we would go into the same area of the mind and experience, see and hear the same sounds, see the same colors, which is an event that is not made known in mystical and occult literature. Mutiny in the mountains. Returning after the 1968 inner search to Nevada, after 4 weeks in Europe, Master was faced with unfortunate consequences of his longer-than-usual absences. A small band of mutinous monks, led by the most senior, approached him with the outrageous suggestion that he retire. They would carry on the mission from now on. Keeping his poise in the face of this challenge, Master invited the group to dinner at Miguel's, a Mexican restaurant in Reno, bringing along an equal number of monks who thought the brazen insurgence was preposterous. En route, he shared his strategy with those who were with him. They would listen to the rebels' reasons and ideas, learn more of their plans, and remain non-responsive. During dinner, the rebels were disarmed by the lack of negative response and openly told Master that his absences from the monastery were too long, and he was, after all, not getting any younger, at 41. They freely shared their ideas for the future, which amounted to transforming the monastery into an open institution, less strict and more New Age. Master left the restaurant without directly responding and never spoke to the group again on the subject. In the days and weeks to follow, he moved one monk, then the next, to another monastery, another mission, slowly reducing the responsibilities of those involved and dismantling the opposition. As the years rolled on, each of the renegades found the courage to leave the monastery. Years later, Swami Satchidananda faced a similar takeover effort from his board of trustees, and Master sent his senior monks to help him successfully turn back his subversives. In the months that followed, Master spent more time in his remote Nevada ashram, leading the monks in the regimen, following in those days 4 one-hour meditations each day. The Shum revelations had intensified his mystical experiences. Of that time, he wrote, a sannyasin of attainment has had many, many lifetimes of accumulating this power of Kundalini to break that seal at the door of Brahman. Here is a key factor. Once it is broken, it never mends. Once it is gone, it's gone. Then the Kundalini will come back, and this gives you a choice between Upadeshi and Nirvani, and coil in the Svadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, wherever it finds a receptive chakra, where consciousness has been developed, wherever it is warm. A great intellect or a siddha who finds the self might return to the center of cognition, another might return to the Manipura chakra. The ultimate is to have the Kundalini coiled in the Sahasrara. I personally didn't manage that until 1968 or 69, when I had a series of powerful experiences of Kundalini in the Sahasrara. It took 20 years of constant daily practice of tough sadhanas and tapas. I was told early on that much of the beginning training was had in a previous life, and that is why with the realization in this life I would be able to sustain all that has manifested around me and within me as the years passed by. Results of sadhanas came to me with a lot of concentrated effort, to be sure, but it was not difficult, and this is what makes me think that previous results were being rekindled. The Garden Island. There was a second inner search in 1968, this one to Hawaii in December, called Ashram Kauai. Master took 27 students to the Garden Island of Kauai, spending 3 weeks at a remote country resort called the Tropical Inn. They had the entire facility to themselves and turned it into an ashram. Situated 4 miles inland along the Wailua River, the inn, built in 1929, overlooked a lush river valley and offered a dramatic view of the island's extinct volcano a few miles away. It seemed like paradise. For years I had been looking for a new international headquarters through which I could expand the activities of my teachings and be more available to those around the world. I traveled through 11 different countries during the summer of the first inner search, and later many successive inner searches around the world, covering 27 different countries in all, until I finally decided to establish my headquarters on the island of Kauai. So much was everyone taken with the place that the devotees suggested it be purchased for the church and optimistically took up a collection among themselves, the beginnings of a down payment. One morning they placed $480 in Master's hand, urging him to make this remarkable site his home. It was not for sale, but he set the money aside for its intended purpose. The world's finest waiters. Returning to Nevada and San Francisco in early 1969, Master was challenged with the growth of his order of monastics. How could he support them, feed and house them, afford to train them? The monastics had, up to this time, lived in rented quarters in the neighborhood or in the temple building. In a new building he purchased for the monks, a new form of training was commenced, a program that had the monastics work in San Francisco restaurants. Master developed it to provide them skills of dealing with the public in busy situations, to mature their abilities to handle details and work with others, to help instill the spirit of humble service so essential to monastic life, and to maintain the self-sufficiency of their order at a time when it had few other sources of revenue. The goal was to become the finest waiters in the finest restaurants in the world, which required the monks to exert maximum effort in personal discipline and deportment. To further their training, Master instigated an elaborate training program in fine waitering for the monastics, hiring professional maîtres d', sommeliers, chefs, and restaurateurs of high standing in the city to instruct the monastics through lectures and demonstrations. For years the monks worked anonymously in some of the city's finest restaurants, surrendering their earnings at the temple altar each night and spending their off hours and days in the monastery and with the guru. Master called the program Silent Ministry, as the monks went out incognito, carrying the vibration of the temple into the world to uplift and bless all those they served and worked with. It was an arduous sadhana, with long late hours in intensely demanding conditions. For those who persevered, it proved to be a great training, one that strengthened the brotherhood and matured the young men. They did in fact become some of the finest waiters in some of the finest restaurants in the world. An odyssey to India. Master Subramania traveled again to Europe, this time with 5 monks and 27 students in July and August on Inner Search Switzerland in 1969. Portugal, France, and Switzerland were the chief countries visited, with half of the month-long pilgrimage being spent in retreat at Casa Eranos. Here he again devoted his time to developing the Shum language, using its conceptual portraits to elucidate the Advaita Siddhanta philosophy. He sponsored at Casa Eranos a special training session for European yoga teachers living in Germany, France, Italy, and Switzerland. In October, along with 12 monks and 54 students, he overtook a 13-week pilgrimage to India and Ceylon. The pilgrimage, called the 1969 Indian Odyssey, visited France, Greece, India, Nepal, Ceylon, Singapore, Thailand, and Japan, with the greater part of time being spent in India, where Master's group was the largest tour ever to visit the country. It was large enough that the Minister of Aviation and Tourism, Dr. Karan Singh, who years later would visit Kauai and take Master as his Western guru, helped with the arrangements personally. In each country, the spiritual leaders were sought out: a master calligrapher in Japan, a Buddhist Roshi in Thailand, and in India a galaxy of yogis and great souls. This was Master's first visit to India in 2 decades, and the first time ever for the students traveling with him. India captivated, confounded, challenged, and uplifted. India was, they concluded, the last place on earth where magic lived on the streets and divinity lived in the eyes of the people. 1-week retreats were held in Darjeeling and Udaipur in the Himalayan foothills, and at Uttakamund in the Nilgiri hills of South India. One day he took the pilgrims to a local theater to see the newly released movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. Shum was again a major study for the pilgrims, and his devotees were introduced to Orthodox temple worship. In Madras he held the International Yoga Convention. What was most dear to Master during this 3-month odyssey was his return to Ceylon, Satguru Yogaswami's home. 20 years had passed since he left the island, and he had longed to be back. The Shaivites of Jaffna received him with enormous respect, with pomp and ceremony, spiced with a little uncertainty. They knew Yogaswami had said, "I have a man in America," and they could see that the American guru was a remarkable soul, but there was resistance, a reluctance to take a Western man as spiritual master. It had never happened, and some were determined it never would, but Master paid them no heed. He had his mission from Yogaswami, and he would carry it forward, with or without them. He sponsored special feasts and festivities centered around the Subramania ashram, and initiated a resident program for his monastics there, whereby they would stay for extended periods at the ashram to broaden their personal exposure to Hinduism and gather scriptures for publication in the West. Temple pujas, temple talks, cultural events, and gatherings filled the ways. With not a single hotel in the area, inner searchers stayed, in 2s and 3s, in the homes of Yogaswami's disciples, living the Shaivite culture they had only heard tales of, learning the charms and subtleties of the East, and making the deep human connections that would tie the East and the West together for decades. Master was home. All could feel it. He stayed at the home of Kandiya Chettiar, who had introduced him to Yogaswami and renewed their connections. He wore a white veshti everywhere, to the surprise of all who had never seen him in one. Feeling the time to be auspicious, he gave advanced dikshas to monastics and devotees, and made plans for his Alavedi ashram to expand its service to the Tamil community. He worshipped at Nallur and Kumbalavalai and at Yogaswami's hut, met with all the senior Sri Lankan disciples, and visited an aged, wisp, thin, and white-haired Markandaswami in his thatched hut. To the amazement of everyone, Master prostrated to this solitary sage, something that never happened before, an act that was taken as his way after all these years of honoring the Guru they shared. Nor did Markandaswami fail to enchant all present. As each inner searcher entered, he was painstakingly careful to follow them with his eyes, and not go to the next until their eyes and perhaps their souls met. Not one was missed. Seated on a wooden bench in his pure white robes, barely in his body, his hair and beard wildly uncontrolled, he regaled his visitors with the great sayings of the illumined Satguru, who had died just 5 years earlier. Inner searchers were transformed by it all as they shared in this joyous homecoming. Master's entire mission was transformed by those weeks by the profound encounters in India and Ceylon. Having visited Hinduism's source, worshipped at Chidambaram, and immersed his followers in the ancient Dharma, he would return many times, and he would bring forth like a river in spate all that he saw and remembered from his youth. No longer would India and Ceylon be a soft reference of the past. They would take center stage in his continuing efforts to bring the West knowledge of the self and the beauties of Hindu culture. During the pilgrimage, a daily diary was published to inform everyone back home of the events and experiences. These Odyssey letters were mailed to Virginia City, printed and distributed from there to make everyone at home feel they were on the journey. Kauai calls. The staff were so exhausted by the journey around the world that Master delayed their return to San Francisco and flew them to Kauai, where he had held the Ashram Kauai retreat in late 1968. They checked into a hotel at Poipu for much-needed rest, but Master seldom did well at that, and he immediately undertook a project to explore buying the idyllic tropical inn they had fallen in love with. When Master asked a monk to inquire about such a purchase, the response came back, "But it's not even for sale." "Never mind that," Master consoled. "Just go there and ask." The monk dutifully drove the 45 minutes to the place, and on his return reported that the owner said it's not on the market. "I see. Now go back and ask him, just theoretically, how much he would sell it for if it were ever to go on the market." Back at the tropical inn, the monk dutifully spoke with the owner, retired Colonel Albert Raish, asking for a what-if price. "As my manager told you twice, it's not for sale, young man." "Yes, I know, but if it were," the monk sheepishly offered. Seeing there would be no respite until a number was forthcoming, Colonel Raish grumbled in a slightly threatening voice, "If it were to be sold, and I'm not saying it ever would, we would want no less than 300,000. Back at Poipu, Master heard the number and decreed, "Go back and tell him we can't afford that much, but we can offer him 165,000 right away. No more. Tell him that." "But," "Trust me, just go and make the offer." An hour later the monk stood before the man and made the counter-offer with great hesitation. "Let me talk with my wife," came the unexpected retort. The offer, amazingly, was accepted, and Master moved to the new property on February 5, 1970, spending the first night alone on the property to take psychic control before inviting the monks to join him the next day. Chapter 24. At Home on Kauai. Master named the lush 7-acre property Shivashram, and made it his home, a courageous move in those days, leaving all past history and properties, moving thousands of miles away to a new land, a small island. Thus ended a long search for his spiritual headquarters. Years ago we came to Kauai and finally never left. I chose Kauai, the world's most remote landmass, because I wanted to be close to my devotees in the east and close to my devotees in the west, while at the same time cloistered from the world at large. Yes, our inner life is more important than our outer life. If we were in San Francisco, New York, Singapore, or New Delhi, we could not do this same work as a contemplative order of meditators and teachers, outreaching primarily through publications and the internet. Kauai is a spiritual place, a vortex of healing energies emanating from its sacred Mount Waialele, pristine air and ocean. To keep in close touch with the careful planning needed to prepare for the upcoming inner search programs, he installed a teletype system between all three centers, Virginia City, San Francisco, and Kauai. These large metal typing stations brought great clarity to the pilgrimage planning and made communications across the sea and an overview of the many activities of the church a much simpler matter. It was the email of its day and could also serve as instant messaging if two or more were online together. Master, whose Shum name was Mamade, pronounced Mamadi, also sometimes called Madere, meaning Satguru, would sit and type long messages, only uppercase was available, offline, onto a paper ticker tape. Hundreds of feet of the tape, perforated with millions of tiny round holes, filled several 40-gallon plastic barrels. These were later fed back into the machine to transmit at 300 baud for hours, when the phone rates were low, to his monasteries, where they emerged from the machine on tractor feed paper. Here is one of those messages to his monks, full of esoteric instruction in the Shum language, for them to work on toward their goal of self-realization. Message to the Nataya at the Temple, September 6, 1970, from Madere. I arrived safely in Lihu, that means goose pimples in the Hawaiian language, safe, and Shumshika about 1 o'clock our time yesterday. It was a lovely trip on a 747 from San Francisco. We had a fine spiritual time together. The memories still linger. Mercy. Good to begin planning for the business meeting for the families on the 15th. Today there will be many things to discuss about the next luau, etc., etc., etc. Both the business meeting and the luau will be held at the temple from now on, so we can plan for that now. Best wishes and blessings for a wonderful week. Work hard on Mulingshum. Each make some sentence sketches to send me so that I can learn it along with you, please. It is beautiful here today. The sun is shining. The river, it is full, reminding me of the abundance the families will have on all planes in their future life. Shumshika bimao, basenim shumale. Strive for i'ikayev o imkayev. Keep your goal ever in the memory cells of your immediate daily affairs. Kayev o i'ikayev o imkayev. Love your Mama Day. Globetrotting Guru. Though the transition from Nevada to Hawaii was all-consuming, Master continued the travel study programs, taking 25 students to Switzerland in July and August, and 29 more to Tahiti and Ceylon during the month of November. This second visit to Jaffna deepened the ties with his Shaiva roots and with Yoga Swami's devotees, and those who traveled with him were immersed in Shaivite temple worship and festivals. While in Colombo, he accepted an invitation from the Buddhist Meditation Center, where he spoke to over 700 Buddhists, partially in the Shum language and partially in English, the whole being translated into Sinhalese. The year's third pilgrimage, a 9-day retreat held in December, included Kauai and the islands of Hawaii, Maui, and Oahu. During the days at Shivashram on Kauai, he gathered the seekers each day in the hibiscus room. In his pure white outfit, he sat in a large, elaborately woven wicker chair, recording hours of inspired talks that were later compiled, printed, and packaged by his monks in Nevada into the 6th edition of the Master Course, 12 one-hour lessons on cassette tape that became his primary teaching instruments for many years. While settling into his island home, Master continued to travel extensively, monthly to his other 2 monasteries and almost weekly to Honolulu to hold meditations and give public classes. A major renovation plan for the old inn evolved, and soon a group of followers flew to Kauai to undertake intensive remodeling of the 1929 vintage estate. For some 3 years, the whining of saws and pounding of hammers became familiar sounds. He gave the new rooms exotic names: the Palace of the Noonday Sun, the Ryokan, Peacock Court, and the Hibiscus Room. It was a heady time, full of travel, of new and constant publications, and the establishment of his home. He always saw it as the Guru's home, not an institution. The monks planted tropical gardens and imported Toggenburg goats, the first in the state, for milk. Master bought horses and had the young monks learn to train and care for these intelligent creatures, advancing to equestrian jumping and barrel running. The virgin monks were commissioned to hire stallions for the mares and witness the breeding ritual and the birth, to enhance their understanding of nature's ways. Similarly, Guru Deva brought cows into the monastery to provide a touch of nature and, not insignificantly, milk and all of its gifts. During the 1972 India Odyssey, 75 seekers traveled around the world with Master through Hawaii, Japan, Thailand, Sri Lanka, which became a republic and changed its name from Ceylon that year, India, Iran, Russia, and France. More than before, he immersed them in the mysteries of Shaivite temple worship, and, as was his way when traveling, he took them to meet the spiritual lights of each nation they visited. Indian saints and yogis, the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, Buddhist lamas in Nepal, Russian Orthodox priests in Moscow, Zen masters in Japan, and imams in Iran. Amid these serious visits, Master showed his easy humor. During the bus ride to Dharamsala to see the Dalai Lama, he led the inner searchers in a long and rousing rendition of Hello Dolly. After spending a day in Ganeshpuri with Swami Muktananda, he was on the bus returning to Bombay when a pilgrim inquired if he regarded the renowned Swami to be enlightened. The philosophical exchanges at the ashram that day had been made through an unusually adept translator, Professor Jinendra Jain. Master thought for a moment, then offered, "Well, either he is or his translator is." Everyone on the bus roared. In Paris he met Swami Bua, a humor-loving yogi who would later visit Master's monastery often and lived to be 120 by one calculation. There were remarkable encounters with Anandamayi Ma, the senior Shankaracharya from Kanchipuram Matha, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Indira Gandhi, a saint named Pundiswami, since he lived in the village of Pundi, who never moved or stood and whose legs had completely atrophied, and others. All across Tamil Nadu, Master visited the ancient Shaiva Adinams, eager to observe and absorb how these temple monastery complexes operate, how they are organized, funded, and administered, the subtleties of how the gurus dress, talk, worship, live, their protocols for interacting with guests and junior swamis, their relationship with the surrounding community, the traditional ways in which devotees serve, to take it all back home to Kauai to continue building an authentic Shaiva Adinam of his own in the West. These experiences would fructify over the ensuing 2 decades as he brought the sacred symbols of the spiritual office with him, the Shiro Bashanam, crown of Rudraksha beads, the silver Danda staff, and Simhasanam, or lion's heart, upon which the Adinakarathar pontiff sits, the unique kundala golden earrings, and the golden pendant he wears. He would bring all these Shaiva insignia to Kauai, to the west. One day in New Delhi he took an early walk during a quiet day. It proved to be a momentous one. He later described it, having pilgrimaged with 75 monastics and devotees throughout India and Sri Lanka to saints and sages, ancient temples, dharmashalas, adinams, and modern ashrams. I happened late one morning during a spontaneous walk upon an extraordinary Lord Shiva Nataraja deity at Nirmala's Copper Bazaar. I walked around the wondrous 6-foot-tall bronze statue situated on the busy sidewalk and quietly said, "Hello." It was the store's insignia and showpiece, too precious to sell, the owner declared, as no value could be attached. Bravely disregarding that fact, we bargained and traded through the morning hours and ultimately acquired it, and as evening approached, arranged for its shipment to our distant garden island of Kauai. At Mahashivaratri time, a year later in 1973, in the jungles of Kauai, our Kadaval Nataraja deity, Lord of the Divine, arrived at Shivashram and was placed in the gardens overlooking the sacred Wailua River, where it was spontaneously decorated, bathed, and worshipped. That night, the exact location of the deity's installation was chosen by Lord Murugan himself when he appeared to me in an early morning vision, upturned his glistening vel, his scepter of spiritual discernment, and powerfully pounded its point 3 times on the cement steps at the monastery entrance, marking the precise spot to place the deity. Lord Murugan's orders were obeyed. On March 12th, the deity was moved into place, and worship began immediately. A rotating 24-hour vigil was established, and it has been maintained without a single hour's lapse to this very day. Under this strict monastery discipline, monks take turns every 3 hours in the temple, night and day, 365 days a year. During this vigil, they perform constant meditation, puja, yogas, and chanting, quelling the mind and giving themselves in profound adoration, prapati, to this remarkable icon. Thus the arrival of the Shiva Nataraja deity transformed our life, and from that day onward, life in and around the monastery has revolved around his divine presence. This establishment of Kadavul Hindu temple on the lush tropical garden island of Kauai, Earth's most remote landmass at the base of Hawaii's oldest extinct volcano, known as Mount Wailele, eventually was recorded in the state archives by the governor as the first Hindu temple in Hawaii. With the arrival of Lord Nataraja, thousands upon thousands of devas of the second world and devas and mahadevas of the third world penetrated the inner atmosphere of the Lemurian mountaintop island of Kauai from several ancient temples. In Sri Lanka, the precious Kumbalavalai Koyil, mystic Nallur, and potent seaside Tirukatiswaram, and in India the mighty Chidambaram, Thanjavur's Brihadiswarar, which I am said to have built in a previous life as Rajaraja Chola, according to several Jyotisha and Nadishastris, and the sin-dissolving Rameshwaram, overflowing in healing waters in 22 wells. The three worlds had at that moment become connected as one, and the Shaivite Hindu religion began to flourish on this side of the planet. Master had another vision of Lord Murugan, known in North India as Kartikaya, around the same time. One early morning in his small chalet next to the Tiruvati Monastery in San Francisco, adjacent to the temple on Sacramento Street, Master had a vision that brought Lord Murugan even further to the forefront of his order's life. Suddenly he found himself flying with a handsome, muscular being around the monastery room. Master later told the monks that he had asked the powerful being who he was and received the reply, "If you don't know, who does?" He knew it was Murugan himself. Master was so inspired by that encounter, he planned to write a book called Flying with Murugan. Though the book never manifested, Murugan's influence in and on the order did, and Master always felt the first of all sannyasins, son of Shiva, was the tutelary head of his monastic community. Nearly every one of his monks was given a name of Lord Murugan, and taught to regard this mighty one as a personal guide and example of purity, detachment, willpower, and speed of accomplishment. Books from the Inner Worlds. Kadavul Hindu temple became the center of the monks' lives, and they began years of training in the devotional arts of Sanskrit chanting and puja. The gods were introduced to them by Master, and they learned to make them the center of life, their support and their friends. Slowly, methodically, Master was, in a big way, bringing everything of the tradition to the West, every monastic ideal, every temple protocol, every yogic practice, planting them all in the fertile Hawaiian soil. Each day he drove with 1 or 2 monks the 5 miles to the post office, as in those early days there was no mail delivery to the rural areas. Taking the day's correspondence to a table at the Cocoa Palms Hotel, he would order a cup of coffee and, opening each letter, dictate his responses, which the monks would type up and mail later that day. On one such day, something remarkable happened. It had never happened before. It would last for months, and it would never happen again. Here is Master's description of that morning. Soon after we had placed the Nataraja deity, my inner eye within the Ajna chakra was opened upon an array of great manuscripts, and the inner library of Lord Subramaniam was seen. Upon each wish and fancy the librarian, a tall, fine, elegantly robed, bearded man, would pull forth from one shelf or another great volumes, and with firm hands open, and turn the pages to the proper place to be read. I read these volumes one after another to the monastics at Shivashram, after this city was obtained. They asked questions. The books were placed within the inner ether of my mind. The pages turned and read and enjoyed and understood. Thus Shiva's great diamond dust-like darshan, flooding out, opened the inner door of our Lord Subramaniam's private library, which contains the records accrued since his arrival on this planet. Lord Subramaniam, the South Indian god, also known as Kartikaya, Murugan, Skanda, and Sanat Kumara, has always been near and dear to us. The venue of this remarkable clairvoyant happening was the garden restaurant of Cocoa Palms Hotel. As the librarian presented each volume and turned page after page, I dictated slowly to a sincere monastic scribe, who patiently and accurately wrote down each word. These were the days when cigarette smoke billowed forth from elite hotel guests at neighboring tables, clouding the atmosphere and creating an ambiance in which the Akashic manuscripts could be clearly seen. The backdrop of Hawaiian music, the hubbub of people talking, and the lower vibration of worldly feelings, too, helped screen out the conscious mind to make this clairvoyant city a working reality. On some days, reams of pages were turned and read. On other days, nothing was seen. Vigilantly, morning after morning, week after week, month after month, we sat waiting, while enjoying fruit, yogurt, and coffee, for my inner eye to open on the inner plane library. The restaurant was not an ordinary location. Our table overlooked tropical ponds amid the island's largest coconut grove near the ocean on the east side of Kauai, the oldest and northernmost of the Hawaiian archipelago. Each day's writings, gleaned by an astral vision near the birthstone Hio, where royalty were birthed in olden times, were penned in letter-sized spiral notebooks. Before noon we returned with them, following the sacred Wailua River 4 miles inland to my ashram, now the site of Kadavul Hindu Temple. What he returned with each day was a new chapter of the Lemurian and Dravidian Shastras, which was read only by the monks for 24 years before Master felt the world was ready and released it under the title Lemurian Scrolls. It was a revelation, a divine transmission that unfolded the early history of mankind in remarkable detail, how we came to this earth 4 million years ago, the spiritual culture of every man, the mysteries of the Kundalini and the central sun, focusing on the nature of life within ancient cloistered Shaivite monasteries, how we lived in ages now lost to human history. Much of what was revealed to Master answered a need for traditional principles to effectively guide and govern his monasteries, provide a traditional pattern of Hindu ascetic life, and catalyze his monks' spiritual unfoldment. These Shastras, along with the Shaivite Shastras, an intimate revelation that a group of devas wrote exclusively for Master's monastic order, became a spiritual guideline that strengthened their faith and informed every dimension of their existence. The monks treasured the privilege and blessing of being around Master, as these superconscious revelations poured through him every day, as the wisdom of the ages revealed itself page by page by page, much like being with the rishis of yore, they thought. Guru Deva told of those days. The early revelations were enjoyed by Matavashis at Shivashram and shared with others at our branch monasteries via an in-house teletype network called Biniba in Shum, our language of meditation. As the flow continued week after week, Matavashis in San Francisco, California, and in Virginia City, Nevada, gathered round to read the spellbinding messages being clacked out on the piano-sized communication devices. The monks were able to type questions to me and receive my responses in real time from Hawaii, thousands of miles away. We enjoyed many philosophical discussions in this way. As each volume finally drew to completion, it was typed up by the scribe on an electric IBM typewriter, from which a dozen or so copies were made and cased in plain white softcover binding. One chapter was read daily at the meditation sessions to mold a new standard of selfless living in my monasteries. The Devas said in their writings that there were many more books to be read, but once the Shaivite Shastras had been completed, Master found it much more difficult to access the library of Lord Subramaniam on the screen of his inner vision. He struggled in the face of external distractions to keep his inner world open to him. Now we are starting our inner work in 1974, and I don't see a thing in front of me on the screen. The Devas must be off someplace. They are finishing up their work with some of the students and devotees who visited Shivashram on the Ganesha pilgrimage. Now I'm beginning to see the glimmering light in the blue akasha, shimmering gold and silver lights reflecting off each other, dancing around in front of my forehead. This is seen with the third eye, and I also see feelings and entanglements, thoughts that have been blocking the vision due to the new guests and retreatants who are fading into the distance as the shimmering lights take over. I have been working for 3 days now to get into this state, which was wide open for many months in 1973 when the Shastric books were seen. While Master's mystic explorations never stopped, they changed dramatically at this point. Rather than clairvoyantly reading Akashic books, he communicated clairaudiently with 3 or 4 great devas to receive their advice and insights on current affairs that concerned him. These messages were vast and varied, from lofty dissertations on temple mysticism to earthly insights into the karmas of the newest monastic candidate. Most central were the communications with an overlord who last lived on earth as an aristocrat 10,000 years ago. When called upon, he provided guidance, especially about the future, pointed out the best direction to be taken, and speaking in transcendental tones of the importance of the work in which Master was engaged. This Rishi's messages, often the most profound and precious of all, were carefully written in a notebook or scribbled on a napkin in some tea shop in Japan, at a coffee table in Madras, or in a cozy corner of Master's own office at the monastery. During a session on Kauai on September 14, 1983, the monastic scribe asked how the devas work with the holy ash prasadam of Kadavul temple that the monastery sends to devotees in the mail. The rishi responded, "With prasadam we are there, and with Shakti we are there. The prasadam opens a channel, a long-lasting channel, between us at Kadavul and the devotee. The vibhuti especially holds the vibration. You have an open channel between you and certain temples in India. This is because the vibhuti from those temples is at the adinam. Generously fill the homes with vibhuti from Kadavul, and they will draw on the Shakti from Kadavul Nataraja, and the open channel will remain wide and clear. Try to obtain your vibhuti from a certain place where it is made in the traditional way. The vibhuti is the voice of Kadavul. Give full amounts in your prasadam bags, not just a stingy little bit, and the Guru's vibhuti pouches should be fat and overflowing." The knowledge shared by Master's band of great devas was limited only by the quality and depth of the questions asked. It was not unusual, once a strong connection was made, for the devas to linger for an hour or more, and for Master to ask every now and again any more questions. The queries focused on current events, issues, people, philosophical queries, and problems of the day. Master received invaluable practical guidance for every aspect of his mission in these sessions, and the monks with him experienced a rare glimpse into another world, a world so familiar to Master, just as real as this world. More, he might say. He explained the way these beings of the inner worlds work to assist sincere aspirants who are incarcerated in physical bodies. There are well-trained devas in the astral plane who work very closely to the earth, seeing to the needs of all devotees worldwide. Devas who headquarter at Kauai Adinam's Kadavul Koyil attend the satsang homa held within the mission houses, dharmashalas and temples and monasteries of our members. This inner network of mahadevas and devas, swamis, yogis, natyams, sadhakas, brahmacharis, brahmacharinis, mothers, fathers, children, in a divine way all work together. This is Shaivism, this is Shaiva Siddhanta, this is the Natha Sampradaya in action. This is how it was in the past when Shaivism flourished all over this planet. This is how it is today, and this is how it will be in the future. Fascinated with Master's helpers on the other side of the mind, the monks wondered what the rishi they had been hearing from looked like. One day, in 1996, Master announced, "Rishi just appeared. I see him sitting there in white robes. He looks very nice. Greetings," he said with a wave of his hand. "Here is his message. It is time to be concentrated, precise, and rigid. We have accumulated much and more than is needed, knowledge for the future and all time. It has to be edited back, re-explained when necessary, and lived. Master, different ones are lining up to talk. Any questions?" Master comments, "He looks a little younger," and the rishi responds, "You are making me young by responding. It is lonely here sometimes in bliss. We have only the fullness of ourself, the company of our perceptions. Those in bliss don't talk to each other. There is no communication here. What is there to talk about when each of us knows what the others know? So it is a welcome event to help out the unknowing." Now he sits back and relaxes as if to say, "What do you want to know?" with a big smile on his face. "What loku are you in?" asks one monk. "In the Brahmaloka, and it is a nice place to be, very active, harmonious, productive. Here everything that you have and use is conceived. This is the world of conception." One of the strongest messages the Shastras brought for the monks was the value, meaning, and absolute necessity of strict celibacy, brahmacharya in monastic life. The Devas gave detailed guidelines, including special sadhanas for those who had lived with women. Only those who had not lived too promiscuously could enter the Swami order. Gurudeva addressed that theme in his Master Course trilogy, drawing a passage from the Book of Virtue, part of the Shastric books he had clairvoyantly read. Brahmacharya is holding the power of the divine within the core of the individual spine, so that as Lord Shiva sends his power through the 5 great winds of the astral body within the physical body, the winds adjust among themselves and emanate a Shakti strong enough to adjust the 5 great psychic fluids within everyone around. This power of brahmacharya is accrued and disseminated through sublimation, then transmutation of the sexual force. Transmutation occurs automatically through regular daily sadhana, the rigors of positive living, and adherence to the ceremonial customs of our religion. Ideally, brahmacharya begins at puberty for virgins and continues on until marriage. Otherwise, brahmacharya sadhana begins after the last sexual encounter with a member of the opposite sex has occurred, and when a conscious decision is made to begin the practice of brahmacharya. On rare occasions through the decades, Master blessed his monks with insights into their previous births, sitting alone with them for hours as the Devas recounted in exquisite detail a series of lives the monks once lived, accomplishments made, and how the monk would contribute to Master's mission in this current incarnation. One learned of lives as a Chinese printer, an early American leader, and an explorer. While traveling with a Swami on a month-long journey in India in 1982, Master brought through such knowledge one evening in New Delhi. At the dinner table, a Deva made contact with Master, identifying himself as the muse of the hotel astrologer, and invited questions. In the next hour, Master unfolded details of 3 of the monks' past lives, guiding the session by explaining that the Deva required that the monk write down each question he had. Then, standing behind the monk, the Deva would read the question and respond, telling of previous lives as a sadhu in India and a merchant in Europe, and of his future in the order. Master noted that the Deva did not speak in words as some Devas do, but rather projected his ideas as thought forms. The travelers from Hawaii had passed several times the doorway of the astrologer's office in the hotel, and been inexplicably attracted to the sign on the door. At the end of the evening, Master handed the monk 50 rupees and instructed him to slide the bills under the astrologer's door as payment for the reading, so that all the karmas of the interchange would be rightly balanced. For Master, it was money well spent. These experiences with the Devas built strong the faith of the monastics, helping them become strong, dynamic soldiers of the within. The Devas themselves gave assurance in their messages that they were there to assist and empower them on the monastic path. When a new Natyam or sadhaka enters one of our monasteries, his life pattern is perceived, understood, and digested. The Natyam's or sadhaka's karma is absorbed into the total group karma of all the monasteries, missions, and individual devotees. Once he has taken his vows, received sandalwood beads, each flower placed upon an altar, every camphor flame, an act of religiousness performed by anyone of any mission or monastery, any place in the world, melts away some of the Natyam's or sadhaka's karma. This is because of his supreme act of dedicating himself as a servant, a slave, a Shivanadiyar of the great Mahadevas of our Shaivite religion. True, there will be things that come up within his personal life to be worked out, but there will be many helping hands from the Shiva Loka, the Deva Loka, Kauai Adinam, Kadavulkoyil, his own monastery in which he lives, and from the surrounding mission to help him through the turmoil. One day at the monastery, the monks who were growing food in the garden were invited to consult with the garden devas. Here is an excerpt. We have fun. If you want to work with us, just have fun. If you want to have fun, just work with us. Do surprises, we like that. Hiding an okra seed in a cabbage patch. Now that's fun. And don't make everything the same, and don't eat the same food all the time. If all people were the same, that would be no fun. Don't line us up all the same in every line. Grow things in patches, slip in a few surprises, and we'll have a ball. As you find many varieties of people, so you find many plants in the garden. Now the lettuce, it doesn't like to be near the cabbage, not even close. There's a whole group of cabbages, the cabbage family, that should all be stuck away in one corner of the garden, far from the lettuce. Plant things in the lettuce patch that taste good with lettuce, radishes and onions and lettuce. Like that. Have fun with it, but keep the cabbage away from the lettuce. Lettuce has no tastes, so grow what helps it taste good. Master did not want the monks to make much of this side of his life, partly because he saw it as normal and unexceptional, the way a great artist takes his virtuosity for granted, and partly because he knew that devotees would focus on all that magical stuff instead of on their own spiritual growth through sadhana to the self within. So these little events, the common coin within the walls of his monastery, never were published, never were reported on the website. Each monk had the blessings of his encounters to be kept sacred and secret. Still, Master did openly, though sparingly, share his inner world with his dear monks, knowing it would be a source of inspiration to them, lifting the veil a bit, revealing another realm of human possibility that ordinary pilgrims on the path rarely get to visit. He would say these are the natural faculties of every human being, waiting deep inside to be unfolded. He would say such things are both our natural heritage and a troublesome distraction from the real work of self-realization, a two-sided sword that can pull us inward if we accept it with tempered enthusiasm, or push us farther from our goal if we become enchanted with the supernatural and the occult and take it on the ego. This balance was for him essential, for he was immersed in the supernatural from the beginning, and worked hard to not let it define him or his mission. Chapter 25, Building a Shiva Stronghold. The power of the Kadavul Shiva temple became supreme following the installation of the Lord Nataraja deity in 1973. The name Kadavul from Tamil is among the oldest names of Lord Shiva, literally meaning he who is immanent and transcendent, or he who is within and without. Humble in its physicality, the temple had a life-transforming Shakti from the start, the natural convergence of Master's vision. Shiva's presence and Morrigan's yogic thrust, it was, Master said, a fire temple, for fire is the element of change, of reformation, and even annihilation. Some people entered the temple and began to weep uncontrollably. They would come in one state and leave in another. Their lives changed in large and small ways. So potent its energies became that Master would in later years, just for a time, allow only vegetarians to enter, seeing that others were too overwhelmed by the energy, overcome by the transformative tsunami of Shakti. The monks found themselves awash in this new energy. Many were thrown into a turbulent time of discipline, change, inner purification, and tapas, their tears watery testaments of the trials the Guru set for them. This intensity launched a difficult time for the entire order, a time of transition and of affirming commitments to their vows as Shaivite monastics. It was a time of adjustment as well to the directions provided by the Shastras and to Master Subramunia's stern demands, his uncompromising expectations of their ideal life, their most perfect dharma. No one said monastic life would be easy, he would console. He created a flow book which defined in minute detail how a Shaivite monk should live, respond, learn, converse, cook, clean, perform chores, take direction, dress, eat, sleep, meditate, worship, surrender, get along with others. Each entry was signed in his own hand to authenticate his acceptance. Every facet of life was described in the flow book, and the Satguru's every guideline, called a flow, was to be followed, always and without exception ever and without excuse. The searing Shakti of Kadavul Temple, the Satguru's renewed call for the elimination of habits and attitudes unbecoming of a Shaivite monastic, and the new requirement that all members of the order be full, formal, proud Hindus, all conspired to cause unprecedented uncertainties among the monks. Master made it plain that a total severance of all previous religious ties was necessary. This was to be an order of purely Shaivite renunciates. It was an extraordinarily brave and demanding requirement. Some may have come to be with a kind of Eastern Messiah, some may have thought themselves universalists beyond the pale of religion, any religion, others may have simply discovered the limits of their will to change. Whatever the causes many felt, one and then another, two and then three more, again and again, back to their families, back to their personal karmas, back to who they were before they entered the monastic path. It began first with the monks and then the members being asked, "What religion are you?" and "What religion do you think Master is teaching?" This was a time of great upheaval, with half the monastic order leaving and a similar percentage of lay members. From a worldly point of view, the departures were catastrophic, like a devastating tornado sweeping through a neighborhood and blowing half the infrastructure to the horizon. All that training, all that dedication gone. So what was Master's reaction to it? He rejoiced. He thanked Shiva for sending all these men away, men who, with their doubts, would have brought the order harsher karmas in the years ahead. With that prospect gone, he called for a party. America's first Adinam. In the early hours of February 15, 1975, lying on a tatami mat in his ryokan room, Master was having one of those profound sleeps that is neither awake nor full of dreams. In that clear space above physical consciousness, the 48-year-old Satguru experienced a threefold vision that would be the spiritual birth of the great Shiva citadel called Iravan Temple and its surrounding San Marga sanctuary. I saw Lord Shiva walking in the meadow near the Wailua River. His face was looking into mine. Then he was seated upon a great stone. I was seated on his left side. This was the vision. It became more vivid as the years passed. Upon re-entering earthly consciousness, I felt certain that the great stone was somewhere on our monastery land and set about to find it. Guided from within by my Satguru, I hired a bulldozer and instructed the driver to follow me as I walked to the north edge of the property that was then a tangle of buffalo grass and wild guava. I hacked my way through the jungle southward as the bulldozer cut a path behind me. After almost half a mile, I sat down to rest near a small tree. Though there was no wind, suddenly the tree's leaves shimmered as if in the excitement of communication. I said to the tree, "What is your message?" In reply, my attention was directed to a spot just to the right of where I was sitting. When I pulled back the tall grass, there was a large rock, the self-created lingam on which Lord Shiva had sat. A stunningly potent vibration was felt. The bulldozer's trail now led exactly to the sacred stone, surrounded by 5 smaller boulders. San Marga, the straight or pure path to God, had been created. An inner voice proclaimed, "This is the place where the world will come to pray." San Marga symbolizes each soul's journey to liberation through union with God. That vision must have wrought profound changes in Master's interior world, for it certainly was the seed of profound changes on the outside. Immediately he embarked on a long journey that would bring Shaivism deeply into the lives of his followers, and build not only a temple to honor his life-changing vision, but a traditional Adinam like the great ones he had visited in South India just 3 years before. Master had observed there was no such temple monastery complex in all of the West for Hindus and threw himself into its creation.